Funding for Election 2020 coverage is provided in part by AARP, a nonprofit, nonpartisan membership association, 86,000 strong in North Dakota. AARP encourages you to vote absentee or vote safely in person and make your voice heard. And by the members of Prairie Public.
Good evening and welcome to Prairie Public's and AARP's continuing coverage of Election 2020. I'm Dave Thompson. Thanks for joining us tonight. Tonight we're going to hear the candidates for Superintendent of Public Instruction. It is the only office on the ballot outside of judges that is no party. Our candidates are the incumbent, Kirsten Baszler, and Brant Dick, who is the Superintendent of Schools at Underwood, North Dakota. We flipped a coin before we started, and because of the coin flip, Kirsten Baszler will be first with her opening statement. And as you will notice, we are socially distanced in our podiums. So let us start with Kirsten Baszler.
Thank you. Good evening. First, I want to thank Prairie Public and AARP for sponsoring this debate. Candidate forums such as this are critically important to our election process and to our democracy. My parents taught me and all of my siblings an ethic of public service. It was never a matter of if we would serve, but it was always the question of how could we best serve. My service has been in education. I have been a teacher's aide, a classroom teacher, a library media specialist, and a vice principal. I've also served on the Mandan School Board for 9 years, 7 of those years as board president. My 3 sons were all educated in the Mandan Public School System and the North Dakota University System. My career has shown me the importance of good public policy in how our education system functions. Thank you.
Next, then we'll hear from Brant Dick.
Thank you. Thank you, AARP North Dakota, for your willingness to sponsor this debate. And thank you to Prairie Public and moderator Dave Thompson. I'm Brant Dick, Superintendent of Underwood School District. I have over 25 years of education experience as a math teacher, coach, principal, activities director, and superintendent. I am the first acting superintendent to run for this position since 1984. I am no stranger to leadership. I serve as chair of the North Dakota Small Organized Schools. I am presently one of 2 superintendents to represent North Dakota on the National Superintendent Governing Board and chair of the Finance Focus subgroup. I believe that the best leaders have remarkably high standards. I strive to set a strong example in regards to ability, integrity, and character. Ask any of my fellow superintendents or any of the activities directors across the state if I am a leader who leads with integrity and character. As an example, I will share a quote from a retired activities director from Bismarck and interim superintendent from Bismarck School District, Dr. Jim Hausler. Quote.
Sir, that's 1 minute, thank you. It goes fast. It really does go fast. But you get the first question, and we'll ask you both the same question. But let's start with how COVID-19 has affected schools and the response to the pandemic. Schools in North Dakota went online in March. Now school districts are being allowed to make their own decisions as to whether they will be in person, online, or hybrid. Maybe a 2-part question. Did the state do the right thing in going virtual in March? And is the state doing the right thing in allowing local decision-making on this issue?
Yes, I do believe that the state is given the right choice to allow school districts to make that local decision. I was on record in mid-May to say that I wish that school districts had that opportunity to make that decision. At that point, there were several counties in the state that didn't have any cases, active cases. It wasn't until beginning of July that my opponent came to the same conclusion of local control. So I do think that was the right decision to make. Local decisions, that's best made. We understand our districts. And at Underwood, we certainly would have had that discussion much earlier if we would have had that opportunity. But we were glad to get that opportunity to be able to have our students come back face to face, and we're happy that that has happened.
Kirsten, your follow-up.
Can you remind me again how long the time limit is?
This is a minute or so.
Okay, thank you. So I'm incredibly proud of the fact that when the school buildings closed in March 15th of 2020, that learning didn't stop. Many other states, many of my colleagues across the country, friends and family, when their school buildings closed, learning stopped for only the most, except for those that were more fortunate and had the ability and the capacity to have their children tutored or in private education at home. North Dakota kept going. We at the Department of Public Instruction were able to make sure that we had all of our distance learning plans approved and in operation by April 1st. As soon as we finished that, we began preparing for the rules and guidance for a soft reopening in June of our schools. We had that out by May 1st. When our schools reopened and the soft reopening in June, again, the department immediately went to work to provide guidance and prepare for the fall reopening. And we had that out long before many other states in this nation on July 15th. But once again, we needed to get to work and we needed to prepare for providing supports. And we've stood up with the partnership of the Department of Health, the Healthy Return to Learning team. A job as a leader is to always be looking forward, not waiting around for someone to tell you what to do or how you have to do things. Again, we are now looking forward to see how we have to lead through this entire year, how we will deal with things like teacher evaluation, student assessments. And so again, we're working to prepare the guidance and support that our schools, our teachers, and our students will need as we move through this next school year with the virus.
Brent, would you like to respond to that?
I would just respond that you know, again, the timing of such, you know, I understand your perspective of making sure that we had everything in place, but, you know, going back, we could have had that decision made about local control much sooner, because if we knew that we were going to head that way, it would have helped us plan much more. So that's the only thing I would say about that. Again, I'm glad that we have that now, and I'm glad that we continue to have that process of local control. So I do appreciate that. I just, you know, wish we would have had that a little bit sooner.
And you have the last word, Kirsten Baszler.
So yes, I appreciate that. As we talk specifically about local control, what I have learned is some students and teachers thrive in distance learning, but we know that the best model for teaching and learning is in person, face to face. And so the state's goal, my goal, is to have all of our students back in face to face as soon as we can safely do so for our students. But that's not our decision at the state. The decision at the state is to provide support, guidance, information to our local school communities to ensure that they have all the information they need.
The next question is related, and we start with Kirsten Baszler. Schools have received some CARES Act money, but at the same time, school districts have more than $300 million in reserve fund right now. Is the current pandemic cause for local districts to have to tap into those reserve funds?
So thank you very much. Again, very, very pleased that we in North Dakota were not forced to have to cut the funding. Even through the pandemic, when our school buildings were closed, schools were kept whole, so they could keep their staff employed, their teachers employed. As we moved into the summer school, as we moved through this pandemic year, they have received $30 million in ESSER funding. They've received $30 million additional from our legislature. There are enormous amount of costs that are being incurred. There are extra cleaning duties. There are extra bus driver costs because of the social distancing. There are so many costs. I do believe if now isn't the time to use your reserves, I can't imagine if it's not going to be used in a pandemic, when could it be used? This is the rainy day that we are waiting for. But with that being said, that's my role as a state superintendent, to continue to work, and I'm continuing to work again with the leadership of our legislature to ensure that the uses of these CARES dollars are as flexible as possible. I am working this week, actually, as we work to see if we can provide some additional assistance to all of our school districts in the state.
So the same question to Brant Dick, and I do know that your district has $900,000 in reserves.
Yes, we are. We're a little over 30% of our carryover, and it is good that we have those reserves. And I know there is a concern there if you start spending the reserves, even though it's a pandemic. You know, what's going to happen for next year for the budget? What's going to happen for paying teachers? Tell you what, it's going to be an interesting negotiations with our teachers. Our teachers are stepping up, are doing a wonderful job. But yet there a lot of them are having to take on 2 jobs, especially those in hybrid. They're having to teach the kids in front of them and to teach the kids at home. And so that's been a challenge. I do want to mention about the $30 million in the ESSER funds. I mean, that was very nice how flexible that was. The additional $30 million that we got, that was really tied into personnel. And in our district and a lot of districts across the state, we can't even find people to work. And so it would have been nice to have that same flexibility in the second round of $30 million that came. And so I'm glad to hear that there's some more funding being worked on. I hope we have the full flexibility like we did the very first $30 million that we have. I hope that's where we end up with on that one.
Kirsten, would you like to say anything further?
Yes, my opponent mentioned the teachers, and I believe that that's where the bulk of this money really needs to go. We need to pay our teachers well. Our teachers are doing heroic work. Our classroom teachers, our classroom assistants, our bus drivers, our lunchroom workers, that's where the bulk of this money should go. Those are the people that are with our children every day. And so I would hope to see that if the reserves are there and that these teachers are working so hard, that we make sure that we are funding them adequately and paying them for the heroic work that they're doing.
And Branch, you have the last word.
And I wish we could have paid our teachers and our bus drivers and our cooks that are presently on staff, but that second $30 million had to be for new staff. And so that was what was really frustrating, is that we didn't have an opportunity to use that money, because absolutely, they are stepping up, they're working hard, they're putting in the extra time. And so I really would have liked to have that flexibility to pay the present teachers, the present aides, the present cooks and bus drivers that we have, but we couldn't do that. It was put into place. It had to be new staff.
That's incorrect. It can be used for overtime, for additional product. Teachers are being paid. If a school superintendent chooses to with their board, that's incorrect. There is no limitation. It does not need to be a new hire.
But you mentioned overtime. So if they do their regular hours, we couldn't pay them. So it had to be overtime, had to be above and beyond. It couldn't be the normal time.
The additional time that they're working beyond their contracted hours, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the fact that they're putting in additional hours. They're planning lessons for in-person students and distance learning. That they can be paid for.
All right. Would you have any further thing to say on that, Brent? Okay. Then you get the next question. It is again on COVID. The COVID is really kind of dominating everything. I saw this recently. Some teachers, especially in Bismarck, are raising questions about resuming face-to-face instruction when COVID cases are rising among younger people. And we're thinking about the 12, 15, 18-year-olds, things like that. Should schools rethink their plans in terms of going back to face-to-face instruction?
I'm going to use some quotes from, I don't know if you've heard the Great Barrington Declaration. It's a declaration that was put into place by 3 professors, one professor of medicine at Harvard, one a professor at Oxford, one a professor at Stanford University. And this is what he stated about face-to-face learning, and this is what I really believe. I think they're on the right idea here. We have grave concerns about the damaging physical and mental health impacts of the prevailing COVID-19 policies. Keeping students out of school is a grave injustice. Keeping these measures in place until a vaccine is available will cause irreparable damage, with the underprivileged disproportionately harmed. Indeed, for children, COVID-19 is less dangerous than many other harms, including influenza. Schools and universities should be open for in-person teaching. Extracurricular activities such as sports should be resuming. Young, low-risk adults should work normally rather than from home. And that's what I would say. I really believe that we need to find a way to get the kids and the students back face-to-face. And though all those were quotes from the Great Barrington Declaration that you can find and see what these doctors have talked about.
Okay. Kirsten?
As I mentioned, I guess in my previous answer, we know that some students and teachers thrive in distance learning, but the great majority, most of our students thrive more, they perform better, and they're happier when they are in school face-to-face with their teachers, their friends, their peers, and all of those adults that care about them so much. So it really is, it's, as I said, the state's goal, and it is my goal, to return our students to face-to-face in-building learning as soon as we can safely do so. But those decisions must be made locally. They must be made in concert with not just the local administrators and teachers and school boards, but also with local public health. with the teachers, with the adults, with the families that are sending their children and to school and their loved ones often as spouses and send their loved one to work, and our moms and dads send their daughters and sons to work at schools. And so with that, we found that schools are not the super spreaders that we once thought they were. And more evidence is showing that. There was a research study that was done of over 200,000 students in 47 states, including students in North Dakota, and we found that they are not super spreaders. But again, the state is not here to make the choice. The state is here to support, inform with data, with research, and provide the necessary assistance and guidance that is requested from us.
Brent, would you like to respond to that? Or?
No, I don't have any response.
All right, so let's go back to Kirsten for this, and this is also somewhat related. We've been hearing some pushback from parents on distance learning. They worry their kids are falling behind. So what do you think could be done to improve the situation, or are we looking at remedial classes for some students?
Mr. Thompson, that is such a good question, and that's what keeps me up at night. That's what wakes me up in the middle of the night and keeps me up. I worry about what the secondary, third order impact is going to be on this. I don't know that we're really going to understand what the impact of COVID-19 has on our young people for 5 years or more. You only have one chance to learn third grade material. You only have one shot to be an 8th grader and learn that material. And when you lose a spring of a spring that was distance learning, and now we're going into another school year. So what have we done? Again, as I said, it's my job as a leader to think 5 steps forward ahead of everything that is. So as we thought about those remediation needs, we did a couple things. We required that every student K through 12 be assessed within the first 4 weeks of school, so we knew exactly where each child was. And we provided additional support and assistance for every family in the state to have, every school district in the state to have some supplemental instruction software access, just supplemental, doesn't replace a teacher, math, reading, and writing. And we've also provided funding for teachers to go back to take classes online, if you will, to become better teachers at distance learning.
Brent, your response.
It has been a challenge. It has been a challenge, especially when you think about the hybrid plan. At my school, when we did our health and safety plan with our teachers and with our community members and with our staff, we couldn't figure out a way to make the hybrid plan work. And so we went face-to-face every day. And again, that's why I'm such a strong believer in that. I think there's been some studies and research that have shown there are challenges with hybrid learning. And there is a concern, for those that are in that situation. I have 2 daughters that attend Legacy School, and they're in the hybrid, and I do have those concerns about, are they learning what they need to learn? And so I do agree that it is going to be a challenge, and we may not know that for 1 to 2 to 3 years down the road. What is the long-term effects of this? So yes, absolutely, we need to figure that out. We need to, with that, also continue to work with teachers and administrators and the stress levels they are having trying to implement these learning modalities as well.
I'm going to ask a follow-up right now that's based on this. Now, we hear some parents who are concerned because some are working at different times and their kids are home and maybe they're not following up on using this distance learning. Are there some things that could be done to help out in the situation? And I'll just ask you, Kirsten.
Certainly, yes. And that is originally, as we move through this, 2 weeks seems like 2 months, and we learn so much more as we move through this. But as we've moved through this, we've realized that the hybrid learning, the hybrid distance plan, or the hybrid distance learning plan is not ideal. It is actually increasing opportunities for transmissible moments. It's actually providing students with a lot of family instability and parents with economic instability. So as we provide support, what we're doing with the Healthy Return to Learning team is encouraging those school districts, if they cannot go back to face-to-face learning, if that's not where their community is, to try to accommodate. So at least in particular, those kindergarten through 5th grade students will have a safe space to go within the school system where there's tutoring available, or within a school building, even if it's not their instructional day, possibly some public community buildings, partnerships that we've seen throughout the state in many communities partnering with the Park District to have the same cohort or pod of kids remain together so we can continue to reduce those transmissible moments. And I think that speaks to the work as one government. We cannot do this alone as a K-12 system. We have to be a village and do this together, working with all systems and all entities within a community, park districts, cities, city commissioners, mayors, county commissioners.
And Brant, your response?
And it's interesting, I have family members that live all over the nation, and there are other states where, including with the list that my opponent has mentioned, that local churches have also stepped up, and and that may be another alternative and another help for those. And I think it's happening a little bit in this state, the different places where that's happening. And then so again, it's working with those local districts to help them find those opportunities to meet the needs of their students. And again, making sure now in rural areas and smaller schools, that's tough. We don't have a lot of those opportunities that were mentioned. We just don't have a YMCA or Parks and Rec in smaller rural schools. So that makes it a little bit more of a challenge that we have to work with. And so for us, again, that's why we're going face to face every day because of some of those challenges. Absolutely.
Kirsten, would you like another bite at the apple?
That's all right. No,
Okay.
I would affirm that there are those communities, partnerships that are going out. I know that there is a challenge that it's everybody's busy. Each government entity is busy trying to solve their own problems. But I will say our children are relying on us, and so my heart is warmed when I hear when I get those calls from superintendents across the state that say their church has stepped up, or the empty building that is used to hold a hardware store is now being opened up because the city has said this is what you can use.
Brant, you'd have one bite of the apple too.
Yeah, well, thank you. And the biggest challenge you really have in the whole COVID situation is the contact tracing. I mean, it is tough. I just had to do it this week. I had to send home some kids. When in our history have we had to send home kids that are healthy, want to be at school, in fact, cry when we tell them you have to stay home for 14 days. And so, that has to be a part of this situation that we need to figure out. And I'm happy that the governor had put into place that if we have masks on both the person that tests positive and the person that's there, that they don't have to quarantine for those 14 days. And that has helped school districts to make that change, give them some incentive. And so we are continuing to look at that as well. But that is really a challenge that we're going to have, is that contact tracing. How can we do that better so we don't have to keep kids at home when they want to be at school, they don't have any symptoms, and they're healthy?
Next, we're going to change subjects a bit, and I'd like to talk about the education funding formula. The state now funds about 70% of educational costs, and I can remember back in the 70s and 80s, that was the figure we were striving for. But in the terms of the formula, there's been study going on in the legislature for the last 2 years. So what needs to change so schools are equitably funded? And we'll start with Brant.
And the funding formula has changed. It used to be that it was based upon if you had a lot of land, you were treated very well, and now it's if you have a lot of students, you're treated very well. And so that is a challenge that we have. There are some things that we need to look at. In fact, we are looking at that. The whole situation of the property values have increased so much that there are school districts that aren't at the local level of 60 mills, and so we're trying to ramp that up. There are other districts that when the formula that was put into place by Governor Dalrymple into the new formula, it was transition minimums, and there's still about 90 school districts that are in that situation. So we need to continue to look at that. How do we transition them onto the formula so it's fair across the board? Equitable across the board. That is something that the legislation is put into place. I have that background of working with legislation. I had an opportunity to serve on the Interim Education Funding Committee. I thank Senator Shively for allowing superintendents and business managers on that committee. Very much appreciated. And that is something that we need to continue to look at. How do we do that in a way that's not going to affect the education of those 90 school districts across the state that have gotten used to that funding, that now we need to look at how to get that back to being fair and equitable across the state.
Kirsten, your response?
So We don't have enough time in this hour or this evening to talk about the technicalities of our funding formula for the state of North Dakota's K-12 education system. But just to be very specific and high level, I guess, in the same time, what we really need to do is work with our legislators and our governor's office to make sure that we are keeping the funding fairly distributed across all of our school districts. We need to pay our school districts for the students that they are teaching this year. We need to make sure that the zip code of a child doesn't matter. Whether they have a great opportunity to have a great education that is well-rounded with broad opportunities, and that they have high-quality teachers in their classrooms in front of them. It shouldn't be dependent on a zip code whether you can pay a high-quality teacher for your student to be there. So really working with the legislators to maintain that strong state funding and continue to look for efficiencies in my office so we can make sure that that K-12 funding can be delivered out to our schools and our classrooms and our teachers. I remember 2004 when I was on the Mandan School Board, just what you were talking about, Dave. It was a challenge for us in Mandan because we couldn't pay our teachers as well as the school across the river in Bismarck paid them. But at that point in time, less than 40% of our budget was coming from the state. About 10% was coming from the federal government. That meant over 50% of our budget was coming from local property tax payers. And we couldn't raise our property taxes anymore, working with the mayor, our park district, and our county commissioners. We couldn't raise them. We were losing residents to Bismarck because they could have the same value of a house and pay less in taxes. So that's why we need to maintain strong state funding for K-12 so we can hold the line on property taxes and we can have fair, equal distribution.
Brent, would you like to respond to that?
She mentioned the challenge that we have in rural school districts for teachers. I mean, I'll take that when he talked about having a quality teacher in front of a classroom. I mean, that is a challenge. Right now, last year was the first year in my career that actually we could not find a teacher, a special ed teacher. And so, you know, we're seeing that. And so we need to figure out a way to recruit and retain quality teachers, quality educators, especially in the rural areas. And there was a loan forgiveness program that was put into place in the last session. That program is no longer in place. So that would be something that we need to continue to look at because, you know, rural schools, for instance, Underwood, we're right between Bismarck and Minot. We're competing with for those that want to teach at the Bismarck and Minots. And it's tough. It's tough to recruit those teachers there. We can't pay as much as the school districts because we don't have as many kids. And again, the formula is based upon students. The more students you have, the better it treats you. So that's something that we need to continue to look at and work with and try to figure out a way to get those quality teachers in our rural areas as well.
Kirsten, you have the last word.
And then, as a leader, that's what you do. You figure out what possible solutions that you can provide to solve that problem. My opponent mentioned special education teachers. One of our highest shortages teachers in the state, in the nation, actually. So what do? What works well? Grow your own. Grow your own. When you have someone that's already living in the community, working as a special education assistant, instructional aide. We have partnered with Minot State University. The Department of Public Instruction has provided scholarship dollars to Minot State University. So when you combine innovation that Minot has done with partnerships, we have created the scholarship program for more than 40 current special education instructional assistants that are attending online to receive their degree in special education so they can become special education teachers, not just instructional assistants, in the home where they already live, doing the work that they already know that they love to do.
I'm going to follow up on this and I'll let Brent take the first shot at this. Are there ways the Superintendent of Public Instruction can further help prevent more reliance on local property taxes?
You know, and that's a great question because really the entities that set the budgets are the local school districts. And so is there a way that the state superintendent can work with that? It's working with legislators. It's trying to figure out, you know, what we have as resources. You know, how can we use the Common School Trust Fund that's there? How can we use the extra money that's going to come into the revenue from that area? Foundation Aid Stabilization Fund is another possibility. So how can we use that to make sure that there's adequate funding for school districts across the state? And so that is something that the state superintendent can have a part of, taking leadership role in that. But in the end of the day, it's the legislation that sets those rates. It's local school districts that set those local tax rates and those budgets. So those are the ones that have to set that. So we're more of an advisory role. We cannot, I don't believe anyway, that the state superintendent can set that for local school districts.
And Kirsten Baszler.
Thank you so much. So yes, absolutely, there certainly is, and that's our role as the state superintendent. That's our role as the Department of Public Instruction employees. We are partners with our legislature. We're the executive branch of education, and we partner with our legislators to find those avenues. I know that our Education Funding Formula Committee, our representatives, our senators from the appropriation committees in each of those respective chambers come often to my office, come often to the floor at the 11th floor of the Department of Public Instruction, and on the 9th floor where Adam Tesher is with Jamie Mertz in our fiscal office. We consistently, we have a team huddle every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday where we have conversations, and each time we have these conversations, we talk about what are some solutions, how can we bring this idea, what do we need to, what is our vision, our K-12 strategic vision, how do we need to meet these 6 goals that the state has set for all of its students, and how can we make sure that the funding formula is adequately addressing what is needed in our schools so they can have the money and we can keep those local property taxes down.
Would you like another shot?
Yeah, I will just say, you know, and there are districts that the local property taxes are low because their taxable valuations have gone up so much. And those with the legislation to try to make it fair, you get that challenge. When you try to make things fair, sometimes the domino effect is that you have increased property taxes. I talked to the Watford cities and the Kildeers and the cities in the western part of the state. They have that challenge. They're going to have to raise their property taxes just because to try to make things fair. We say we want everyone to provide 60 meals of local effort. And so that's the challenge that you have is when you try to make things fair, sometimes it affects property owners and property taxes as a domino effect of that.
Kirsten,
and that's exactly why we work so hard at the Department of Public Instruction to make sure that we have accurate numbers, that we have a funding formula so we can provide that information before a decision is made so we can see what the impact will be on each and every one of our 174 school districts in the state.
The next one is a related question. I'm going to start with Kirsten Baszler first. With an expected tight budget in the 2021 legislative session, how do you make sure K-12 education receives what it needs?
So we talked about the history. I've had to lead through those down times in our economy and our state's economy. So as I said, I will work to maintain that strong state local funding for our local schools. That's my responsibility. I need to continue to look for efficiencies within my own agency so we can increase the collaboration. I have been able to lead through downturns in the economy before. In 2016, we began with 2 budget cuts under Governor Dalrymple. We continued budget cuts to our agency in the 2019 session. We're asking to do that again. So I've been able to lead through that, and I've reduced my salaries and my operating budget by over $1 million since I took office in 2013. I've gone from 101 employees to 82 employees that are absolutely fabulous, committed people that are a team that works like no other. And as I said, I have decreased my salaries and operating budget by over $1 million. But I do find it troubling that my opponent has increased his budget for his school of 200 by almost $1 million since he's been overseeing his budget.
Would you like to respond?
Absolutely, and I'll talk about the increase in budget. The very first day I started at Underwood School in 2011, I remember on my desk was a paper to sign to do a remodel for $2 million, and I remember calling up my board members that hired me and said, am I okay to sign this? Are we good to go? And they're like, yep, we've done all that. That came out of my general fund, so that was some of the increase right there. And the other part of the increase was the increase in salaries. I mean, to try to keep in step with the Bismarcks and the Minotts and Mandans and so forth. I'm very proud that we've been able to offer an increase in salary for our teachers every year, and so that's part of our increase in salary as well. And I will also mention, you mentioned the decrease in the number of employees that you have, the DPI, and I listened into the audit report, and I remember listening to Adam Tesher say that he was not able to find some information because someone had left and they weren't able to fill that position. And so I worry a little bit that we've cut too much and now we don't have the service that we once had from the Department of Public Instruction. And so that'll be something that would have to be looked at if I was elected, are we able to provide the service and do what we need to do with the decrease of the number of staff that there is at the Department of Public Instruction?
Kirsten, would you like to respond?
So again, yes, we are always looking for efficiencies, and we are always, as we've been asked to cut, we've been asked to cut our budget again. We won't be cutting any salaries, and we won't be cutting any people at the department. We are as lean as we possibly can be. As I mentioned, the team at the Department of Public Instruction is extremely talented and extremely committed. They left higher paying jobs at local public school districts to come to work for the Department of Public Instruction on this team with me because they are so committed to our state's students. And so while we hate to see people go, we hate to see people retire, but when they retire and they move out of state, we have to have that opportunity because the K-12 budget in North Dakota is $2.3 billion each biennium. It's very important to me that we deliver the majority of those dollars for K-12 education out to our local school districts so we can get that money as close to our classrooms and our students as we can.
Last word, Brant Dick, if you want.
Thank you. And that's one of the reasons why I ran. There's been challenges in the people in the Department of Public Instruction. I've done some research and I found that 30% of employees at the Department of Public Instruction from the day that my opponent started to the midterm, 30% left. From the midterm to the end of where she's at right now, another 30% of employees have left. And that's made it difficult for school leaders because you develop those relationships with the Department of Public Instruction, and all of a sudden things change. Either they leave or they get assigned a different job. And so that's been a challenge. And so that'd be something to build that team and make sure we have quality people in there with some experience in the K-12 educational system.
Kirsten, would you like to respond to that?
I absolutely would. I would, be curious to see what the average employer's turnover is. We are always sad to see people go, but some people retire. They have served their years. They move on. They've chosen different vocations. One of our recent employees, who is a former superintendent himself, a high school principal, chose to become a pastor. We're sad to see them go, but I'm happy to see that they are going on and pursuing what they're doing. I am very proud to have received the endorsement from the organization that represents the public employees, my teammates, and the teachers of this state. And so with that, I think that signals that we are a team. I've also mentioned that it's very hard for us to compete with local public schools. Most of our staff are credentialed teachers. Most of them have master's degrees and are credentialed in education. And so it's hard for them to stay working at the state when they can make so much more in a public school district. But as I mentioned, many of them left a public school with higher paying to become part of this team that is doing so much for our students.
And Brent, one more time.
And right now we have a situation in the North Dakota Department of Public Instruction. There is no one in that department right now with any superintendent experience. And that's bothersome. We need to have that level of understanding and expertise in the Department of Public Instruction. And right now there isn't anyone with any superintendent experience in the Department of Public Instruction.
Right. The next question, we'll start with Brant. Parental involvement may be much more different now than it was when we were all growing up. Do you believe that's true? And how would you like to change that, if at all?
Well, exactly. Parental involvement, that's very important. I mean, the students that do well are those that have parents that do well. We've had those discussions in our school with my principals and myself. We have our parent-teacher conferences coming up, and it's interesting because we know that those parents are going to show up are those that they're interested and they don't really need to be there, but they're there anyway. And so it is different. And how do we utilize social media, different avenues that they are going to get their information? And so absolutely, we need to continue to push that envelope. How do we continue to include parents, and how do we make sure that we hear their voices as well?
Kirsten?
This is a very important subject to me, one that I'm very passionate about. As some of you may know, I have a family engagement cabinet that I meet with quarterly. During the pandemic, we met every week, Saturday mornings for 2 hours. Families are our students' first and most influential teachers. And without families, our students won't be as successful as they can. This pandemic has underscored the importance of that school-to-home relationship. Families have understood the heroic work that teachers and educators do. Educators have more fully understood how important it is for families to be involved, for their students to be as successful as they can be. This was something that I knew was important. And I brought a proposal to the 2019 legislative session, and the budget section, the appropriation section, provided me with a grant funding. They provided me with funding to do some pilot work, to provide training to our schools, to our school leaders on how we can better engage families, more authentically partner with families, not simply send a newsletter home or have an open house for parents, but to authentically partner. We provided trainings in 8 different locations over a 4-week period to all of our schools. So there was an opportunity for all of our schools. We did that last fall. 138 school leaders attended that training on how they can become better communicators and better partner. Unfortunately, my opponent was not one of those 138 leaders that attended that training.
Brent, would you like to respond?
Yes, I would. How many of those 138 leaders that were there are implementing the what you had for them?
Quite a number. I don't have it quite a number, but I would say over 50%.
Because the comments I heard is that was basically Facebook for education is what they felt they got out of that. And so I know there's a lot of school districts that are not implementing that training that they had.
So the tool is what you're talking about. There were 2 parts. There was the 2-day training about how to better communicate, behaviors, processes, procedures, opportunities for partnership, the training about how do we engage families. The tool was the second part. Some of those chose to, about 50% chose to, others didn't. We can all benefit from more authentically listening to our families about what their child, no one knows their child better than that family member.
I totally agree with that.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, this is kind of an overall question. I'm going to start with Kirsten. What do you think, if you had to identify one issue as the biggest issue facing education today?
That's a very good question. I think the biggest issue that is facing education today is our need to prepare our young people to be agile and to be able to learn about anything. Many of us have heard over and over again that the jobs that the majority of our young people will have in their lifetime aren't even existing yet, aren't even creating yet. So I think it's extremely important that we as educators get high quality teachers that are well paid in front of our students each and every day in every zip code in this state. So those teachers can blend the science of teaching and the art of teaching to teach our students to be curious, to ask good questions, because that's the skill that will allow them to adapt and be innovative and be able to be agile enough to make sure that they are able to navigate their way through the rest of this 21st century.
Brent, same question to you. What do you think, if you had to figure out one issue, what is the biggest issue facing education today?
And I'll focus on the word that you say, today. Because today the biggest issue that we have faced is stress levels of educators, or stress levels of students of the pandemic that we're in. That's what we're facing today. Tell you what, it is hard for teachers, and I still teach a class. I still teach a dual credit college algebra course, and so I've experienced it firsthand. I never know for sure if I'm going to have everyone on my camera over ITV, because I'll get emails in the morning saying so-and-so is quarantined because they were close contacts or they tested positive. And that's a challenge. That's a challenge that educators face today, and that's what we need to really focus on. How can we make sure those students are learning today as we move forward? How can we make sure we help those teachers, administrators, all the other employees to deal with that stress? Normally, teaching is a stressful position. That is why we have breaks and whatever else. There's stress in there. This year, you got to ramp that up about 3 or 4 notches because of the pandemic and so forth. So that is what's facing us today.
Kirsten?
I would just say that it's critically important that we have the highest of standards for our teachers and our students. We cannot lower our expectations during this time or any time. We must continue to improve our standards of teaching and learning. That must be our constant quest for continuous improvement. We've adopted something that was developed by the educators in the state, both school administrators, principals, teachers, and family members, something called Choice Ready. Choice Ready means that when you graduate, when you get that diploma, that your school district, that your high school particularly, has done exactly what it was supposed to do to meet you where you were at. So when you graduate, that diploma means something. It means that you're ready for either college or work or the military. We need to keep increasing our choice readiness because those high standards of teaching and learning are critically important.
And Brent.
Students aren't going to be able to learn if their baseline needs aren't being met. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and so that's what we need to find. We need to figure out their needs, their needs of being at school, being a consistent learning environment, and until we meet those needs, everything my opponent says isn't going to matter. We have to meet those foundational needs, and we have to work with the teachers and administrators to help them with their stress, and that's what we need to work on. That is what we need to have as a priority as we move forward.
Kirsten, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, Mr. Dick has, talked about the mental stress, the behavior health problems that many of our teachers and young people are experiencing. That is what we do have to talk about. Again, working with my partners at the Department of Human Services, I would just encourage everyone to go to the Department of Human Services parentslead.org. On the Department of Human Services, there's also resources that we've developed to support our teachers, to support our families, to support our school administrators. The enormous amount of information that is on that website is just phenomenal. And again, just gratitude to my partners at the Department of Human Services, particularly the Behavioral Health Division. We are now continuing, we began conversations this week about how we again at the state are going to assist in being able to bring out teams to help support and help those teachers, help our school administrators with the stress and the behavioral health challenges that they're seeing, as well as students that are facing those same challenges.
Brent, I'll give you one more.
Thank you. One of the things that I've done some research on is the number of suicides in your young people, and that saddens me. As an educator, I've had twice in my career where I've had a student that just felt life wasn't worth living, and that touched me deeply in those families. My heart goes out to them. In 2019, we had 13 suicides in the state of North Dakota. That's too many, 13 too many. I have asked the question, I have yet to have it answered, how many suicides we've had in 2020 through the pandemic and up to this point. And my fear is that it's higher than the 13 that we have. I don't know for sure. I'm waiting for that information. But that being said, that is a concern, the mental health and so forth, because one suicide is too many in this state.
Okay. I'm going to follow up a little bit with this. And the question may be odd, but it just came to me. And I'd like to start with Brant. How do you convince people to go into the profession of teaching with what you've just said about stress and things like that?
That is a great question, and that's my major concern for this year is the amount of stress that there is. I mean, we're finding studies that even before the pandemic, teachers were encouraging their kids not to go into education, and that saddened me because education is a great field. There's nothing more noble than seeing a student's eyes light up in the classroom when you're explaining something and they say, I mean, that's a high for a teacher. And so that being said, it is hard. How do we get young people? How do we get quality people into the field of education? And it's not just pay, it's not just, there has to be that acknowledgement that this is the highest profession. This is a high standard that we can look for our young people to go into. And the relationships that you build are lifelong relationships. And somehow we have to convince young people that this is a noble profession to go into. And that's what we need to do.
Kirsten.
I, on the other hand, have 3 adult sons. I tried to convince all 3 of them to go into teaching, and none of them took me up on it. One is a speech therapist, and I was hoping could be a school speech therapist, but he works at Sanford Hospital in Bismarck, so lost one there. But with that being said, you start early. Just like any other profession, I often have business people and trades unions come and talk to me about how can we get more kids interested in this occupation or that occupation. And the answer is you start early. You build programs that there are several programs across the state called Junior Educator in Training, the JET program. You let those middle school students come down and help tutor, and they get the love, they get the taste in their mouth and the feel for that passion that they get when you finally see a child unlock something. So you start early with that, but you also make sure that we as a nation uphold the profession of teaching. That we understand. I think many of us understood that heroic work that was being done this spring. Ask any parent who had to help their child with distance learning at home this spring or continue to do so. It's hard stuff. And so I hope that this COVID, if nothing else, helps us understand the challenge and that we are elevating the profession of teaching to the same level that an attorney or a judge or a doctor may have as that esteem. And so I would say those two things. We continue to support the JEP programs. The 2019 legislative session, we worked with our legislators to get a bill passed where we could provide high school coursework in a track program that was directed to teachers. We had always talked about why do we have career tracks for other professions but not our own. So we changed that in the 2019 session. So students in high school can take classes that prepare them to become a teacher, and they'll knock some of the classes off their list that they would need to take in a teaching profession as when they go to college.
Brent, would you like to further respond?
It's just about relationships. If you can develop those relationships, if you can have a coach or a teacher identify at a young age, I totally agree with that. You know, there are certain students that you come in contact with that you say, you know what, you be a really good teacher. That's part of my story. I remember someone saying, you explained that really well. You should become a teacher. And you know, that stuck. And that's what we need to do. We need to encourage our teachers, our coaches to identify those people that have those skills to be successful. And the other thing I'll say is we need to be careful that we don't overload our teachers. It's crazy when you look at what was expected of our teachers back in the 1960s to what we expect of our teachers today. And it seems like we're over and over, we're adding to their plate. And we need to figure out a way to take some things off their plate so they can just teach. And that's what teachers want. They want to teach. They don't like having to add all these different programs and whatever else. So as administrators, that's what we can do. We can try to find ways that we hold that profession high by saying, you know what, we want you to teach, we'll take care of this for you.
Kirsten, anything?
I would just end with, it starts and begins with all of us. Pay our teachers well and make sure that they get the respect that they have earned from each and every one of us.
Well, I'd like to follow up on that because teachers apparently, probably in both of your opinions, are not paid what they should be. Am I correct in assuming that?
I would wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah, absolutely. And the state has come a long ways. I remember when I first started teaching, we were at the 49th, trying to make sure we weren't at that 50th. And I think we've climbed up to about 35th. And so, you know, again, I'll say that's, you mentioned my budget. That's what I'm proud of. I'm proud that we continue to increase our salaries for our teachers because we'll never give them what they're worth.
So yes, we have, again, Senator Hoeven, then Governor Hoeven, made a deep commitment to making sure that we weren't in 50th place. And when Senator Hoeven was Governor Hoeven, he made that commitment and it was a priority. I think we need to do that again. I believe, you know, pay is the critical issue to get more of our young people into teaching and encourage those that are there to stay there. But we also need to provide respect and support and assistance to our teachers as well.
So the main question to both of you is, yes, they need to be paid more, but how do you get there, I guess? And if you have a short answer on that, I'd appreciate that.
And it's not just pay. I mean, for instance, in this pandemic, our parents had a choice to distance learn, and a lot of schools had their teachers teach their class and provide the distance learning. And we didn't do that at Underwood, and I would encourage administrators, don't do that. You're doing too much. You're putting too much on that teacher's plate.
Kirsten, last word on
I would say history is a good teacher. I would say that the plan that Governor Hoeven had before he became our senator worked. He provided increases in the funding formula budget that was absolutely 100% required to be used on teacher pay.
All right. We have now reached our closing comments. You each will have a minute, and we'll start with Brent.
Again, I'd like to thank AARP North Dakota for your sponsorship of this debate, as well as Dave Thompson. Thank you for moderating, Prairie Public for hosting. I'm so grateful to all the amazing people in North Dakota who have shown their support and provided encouragement to me while seeking this position. Thank you to all of those who have already voted for me. It is much appreciated. I am truly humbled to be here. My dad, Laverne, who had only an 8th grade education, and my mother, Mathilda, who achieved a high school diploma from Munich High School in 1946, instilled in me a love for learning and to never take it for granted. I'm the youngest of 13 children, and each of us has completed college degrees because education has been integral to me and my family. As one of just 5 students in the 1989 Munich High School class, I learned at an early age the importance of support within a school setting. At the end of the day, an effective leader is judged on character and competence. I am ready to lead schools into better outcomes and build trust throughout the entire organization. No matter what zip code a child is from, my expectation for them is that they will be great. I ask for your vote for State Superintendent. And I'm going to close with this quote from Dr. Jim Hausler. I not only view Brent as a fine person, but also as a fine educational administrator. His approach to his profession is embedded in integrity and dignity.
All right. Kirsten Baszler.
Thank you. In closing, I want to take this time to thank the bus drivers, the lunch workers, the siblings who are tutoring their brothers and sisters at home, and of course, our families and our educators who have done so much to help our students learn and continue to grow. So much has been done. So many people have done so much. The stories of teachers making house calls, moms converting their bathroom shower walls into whiteboards, bus drivers delivering meals. This is the true North Dakota spirit that dates back to our origin as a state, as North Dakota became a state and first committed to providing an education to every one of its children. It is with that deep gratitude that I continue this commitment to our students and their families and hope to do so for another 4 years. Thank you.
And I would like to thank our two candidates, Kirsten Basler and Brant Dick, for being here tonight. And remember, you need to vote. The election is less than 2 weeks away. For Prairie Public and for AARP, I'm Dave Thompson. Thank you for tuning in.
Funding for Election 2020 coverage is provided in part by AARP, a nonprofit, nonpartisan membership association, 86,000 strong in North Dakota. AARP encourages you to vote absentee or vote safely in person and make your voice heard. And by the members of Prairie Public.